Hello YouTubers and welcome to another episode here on the channel. We've made it back to the Yam Cave getting some yam down on these machines behind me. Today we have 2 hours on these machines. We're going to split it up into an hour on this dynamic RowPerfect machine and this static C2 Model D rowing machine. But as the title suggests, we're going to kind of talk about the differences between this dynamic machine and this static machine. So before we get into it, I would really appreciate it if you could do 2 things. Number 1, if you could subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And number 2, if you've already subscribed, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. Both of those things combined really help out the channel, really help push the Yam Squad further and further. But now we're going to discuss the obvious differences between the RowPerfect behind me and the Model D Concept 2 beside me before we get into the sort of less obvious differences that you might not know if you've not tried either machine. So if you've never actually tried a dynamic machine or a RowPerfect here, I'm going to just take a few strokes on each so you can kind of see the difference between the sort of movements required for both machines. So they are a little bit different, but they are both tied to rowing and they are supposed to mimic rowing as best as possible. So that is the RowPerfect. As you can tell, the feet and the seat move. Both move independently of each other and you're in control of both at the same time. Whereas on the rowing machine, only the seat moves, and that's generally why it's called a static rowing machine, because the feet stay where they are and the seat is pushed from there back and forward. But now, for those of you that haven't seen the C2 rowing machine, we'll have a little go on that now. And that is the classic whir of the Concept 2 rowing machine fan. And as you can tell, there's quite a big difference between this noise and the RowPerfect noise. Both generate a very distinct noise, and you know when someone's on the RowPerfect or someone's on one of these machines just by hearing the noise they are making. But as you can see from both examples, on the RowPerfect, like I said, the seat and the feet move up and down the slide, whereas on Erga's Bay, only the seat moves back and forth. So the idea behind the seat and the feet moving is it replicates, or at least gets closer to replicating, the feeling of rowing on water. So it is, in theory, more applicable to rowing on the water. But there are many arguments to be had, the benefits of being on a C2 rowing machine versus a dynamic, not just a RowPerfect. There's a lot of dynamic rowing machines out there, but there's advantages and disadvantages to using both. More and more people seem to be using the dynamic machines, and therefore that brings one of the biggest disadvantages of using them out of the equation. Really, you can't really compare times across, say, different teams or different machines. So when someone says they're doing a fast 2K on a RowPerfect, you can't really compare that to a fast time on a, say, for example, a Concept 2 machine because they are different. And that kind of brings me on to another subject that's a bit more, but that kind of brings me into the more complex subjects that we'll get to post my workout. So it's going to be on both of these machines, 1 hour on each, just a steady UT2, steady state row on both. So an hour on the RowPerfect to get that feeling of, to get the supposed benefit of rowing on the water, and then getting on the static rowing machine to really sort of focus on, I would say, more focusing on the physical benefits of the rowing stroke that you get sort of cardio-wise, fitness-wise, strength-wise, rather than trying to combine the two, going on a dynamic machine where you have to spend a little bit more of that focus on keeping the technique right so the machine actually behaves in a way that you can continuously row. But like I said, we're going into more complex things after this workout. So let's get to it. And we've finished off the hour on the C2 and an hour on the RowPerfect. Average heart rate 125. Feels like for me a little bit more difficult to raise the heart rate on the RowPerfect, but that's probably down to me being much more used to the C2, so I know where I can push and how far I can push, especially on the longer workouts. I know sort of where I can go, whereas the RowPerfect is a bit unsure, so I don't want to overcook it and then blow my doors off on the steady stuff. So we are getting there. We're improving the used to-ness on the RowPerfect, but I wanted to talk about sort of the ability to rate on the different machines, and even just looking at sort of the feet in a closer angle. So if we start, since I'm on the C2 just now, if we look at the feet here, all it is, this is a static plate, and you push back on the seat to move the seat back. You put the feet in here and then tie these feet up, and it's as simple as that. So the RowPerfect uses essentially the same foot plate mechanism. So you put your foot in here, strap it in, pull it tight, but instead of being static, the foot plate actually pushes away down the slide, and that is the biggest difference between the two. So on this RowPerfect in general, this is Charlie's RowPerfect. He's replaced the handle with a Concept 2 handle and the seat with a Concept 2 seat. Usually they are different, the handles are a bit different and the seat is a bit different, more akin to a boat seat and sort of boat handles, but these don't really vary too much. It doesn't really change too much, it's more of a comfort thing. But onto the ability to rate on the two machines. Like I mentioned earlier about sort of the comparison between scores, a lot of the difference in scores come along when you look at the differences in rate. Because the rowing machine, or sorry, the C2, the Concept 2 rowing machine is a static machine, it's more difficult to rate higher. You're moving more of your body mass every stroke, and so your rate, whether it's a 2k, a 5k, whatever it is, the rate is harder to put higher, so therefore you don't take as many strokes a minute. On the RowPerfect or on other dynamic machines, you tend to be able, or your body mass is moving more and you're not necessarily pushing as much. You've got more momentum on your side, so you're not necessarily pushing as much of your body weight every stroke. So it makes it easier to rate higher. On top of that, instead of just using sort of your feet to almost pull you up the slide on the here, when you pull up here and pull up the slide on the RowPerfect, you can pull the feet towards you and almost bring the seat towards the heels, like compress like that, rather than just compressing the seat towards your heels, if that makes sense. So that also helps with rating higher, and that means for the same effort, you're taking more strokes a minute and therefore covering a faster, or covering a distance faster, so therefore the times should be quicker. Some people, I've read a lot about sort of differences between times, but I think it can vary a lot with experience. If you're saying it's a very experienced person on the, say, RowPerfect, the dynamic machine, versus someone very experienced on the C2, say on a 2K, I've heard there's around 6 seconds of a difference, but like I said, that can vary individual to individual, experience levels, ability. Are they used to either ones of the machines more? For example, me, I'm much more right now used to the C2 rather than the RowPerfect. I used to do a lot of RowPerfecting at uni, and I remember doing a very fast 2K, but I'm not sure about the settings. And lastly, I think the biggest thing between a dynamic machine and a static machine, a lot of people talk about the benefits of a dynamic machine being better for the body, better to more, it's easier on the body, easier on the muscles, easier on the back on a dynamic machine. I don't disagree with that, but I think the C2 gets a lot of bad rap for injury and having sort of a bit more jarring to the body. I think a lot of, on both machines, you can have injuries caused, and I think in both machines, or all the machines, whether it's dynamic or static, whatever the machine is, the injuries caused are down to technique issues and not necessarily down to the machine. So when you're on, so for me, I have been over sort of the past couple of months, apart from this last week or two where I'm hopping between the RowPerfect and the C2, spending a lot of mileage, spending a lot of time on the C2, touch wood, without any issues. And I think that's because of the technique that I do, that means that there's less sort of pressure on my spine, on my back, on my body, that I can do that mileage. And I spoke about intensities of a workout, an easy session, keeping that intensity there, which is also a big impact. But I'm going to make a whole nother video about the erg technique, the technique that you should use, or at least I think you should use on the C2, because I see a lot of people saying you should row this way or that way, and sometimes I think, wait a minute, that isn't quite right. But as always, I'm not an expert, but I think using what I've learned could help you, but as an individual, trying to take everyone's opinions and make your own opinion. But what machine should you use? What machine do I prefer? Like I said, there's different sort of reasons to use both machines, or the wide plethora of different machines. I really think the C2 is the sort of gold standard for comparison across rowing. So if you say to someone, I've done a 2K, they've probably done a 2K on a C2 rowing machine, and you can compare. But if you've said, I've did my 2K on, say, a RowPerfect or another dynamic machine, you can't compare that to another machine. You can only compare that to the machines that you did that test on. But the use of these machines is increasing, so the amount of people using them are increasing, and so therefore the sort of data points of comparison are also increasing. So hopefully in time we can kind of really get a close gauge of, well, this is the time between all of the machines, not just say RowPerfect and C2, but all different dynamics, at least the ones that should benefit best. But like I said, I would use this to sort of look at trying to improve technique a little bit, or at least hold on to technique a little bit more, whereas the C2 is purely, I sit on this purely for sort of the fitness benefits, whether it's a high intensity session, a low intensity session. I know when I sit on this, it's very simple, and all I have to do is my erg technique, and it will, depending on the workout, hit that zone. Whereas a RowPerfect, for me, it's slightly different muscles used. There's a little bit more focus that goes into actually rowing, actually using the machine, but that could just be down to sort of not using it as much. And it's also a little bit more fragile too. So it needs a little bit more TLC, if it were. But that will be it for today's episode, Jam Squad. Let me know in the comments below what you think, whether you have a favourite rowing machine, C2, RowPerfect, Dynamic C2, sliders, whatever it is, or even which ones you've used, and then we can have a little discussion on sort of which one the Yam Squad like the best. And as always, remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button, and I will see you in tomorrow, where fingers crossed the rain doesn't get too bad today and we're going to get out in the double for the first time in many years. Oh yeah.